Hello everyone, I'm Karen Doyle, Operations Director of CTAM Europe. Welcome to today's webinar and thank you for joining us. Let me introduce Simon Murray, who you may recognise from past CTAM Europe webinars and also industry events. Simon is Principal Analyst at Digital TV Research based in the UK, and today he's here to tell us his thoughts on the Global OTT Arena and how it is changing once again. We're due to last around 30 minutes with time for questions at the end, so please use your Q&A button to post your questions. As always, the recording of this presentation will be posted on the members only section of ctameurope.com. If you're not a current member, please email info@ctameurope.com for details on how to sign up. Members have access to a monthly webinar like this one, an annual symposium, along with webinars and podcasts from our colleagues at the CTAM US. Our flagship program is the fantastic week-long executive management program at INSEAD, which is taking place next March. The class at the moment is over half full, and I'll follow up with details on the program by email in the next day or so. Your details will also be shared with Simon and Digital TV Research, who may in turn follow up with you. So with all that said, I'll take myself off screen now and hand you over to Simon. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen, and hello, everyone. These are our latest global OTT forecasts, hot off the press. They include the figures for September for most of the companies that have revealed them. Some companies have not revealed their September figures yet, especially the Chinese companies. But our figures are global. They cover 138 countries, and they cover TV series and movies only. So, at risk of stating the obvious, you can't watch OTT content without a broadband connection. And by 2029, we think there's going to be 1.1 billion fixed broadband homes around the world, and 5.3 billion smartphone users around the world, including 2.9 billion in the Asia-Pacific market. Now, the reason why I am stating the obvious is because in a lot of emerging markets, the fixed broadband penetration is very low. So people watch OTT content on their mobile phones. And if you look at the pie chart on the right-hand side, you'll see a lot of those big countries there with smartphone connections the audiences are reliant on their phones to watch stuff, except for the US and Russia. So even in China, which has quite high fixed broadband penetration, and Japan, the same thing, people do watch a lot of content on their phones, which can alter the way that people approach the marketplace. Okay, so revenues will reach $219 billion by 2029. And as you can see from the right-hand side, growth in AVOD revenues will be higher than growth in SVOD revenues. Having said that, the growth in AVOD revenues will reach 68 billion by 2029, is much lower than SVOD revenues, which will reach $131 billion by 2029. And here are the main countries. No surprises. The US is the biggest country by a long way. China in second place. So the US and China together take nearly half of the total. We're talking about revenues increasing by 54 billion between 2023 and 2029, of which 22 billion, so quite a big proportion, will come from the top 5 countries. And a lot of people might be surprised to see on the right-hand side that the US is going to be the biggest growing country in terms of adding revenues, despite the fact that people have been saying for quite a long time that the US is the most mature market in the world. Well, the US also suffers and is continuing to suffer from cord cutting, much more than anywhere else in the world, apart from perhaps Israel. But cord cutting, I mean, people in developing countries are cutting back on their pay TV subscriptions, but it's nowhere near as bad as what's happening in the US. And the other factor in the US's favor is choice. There's no other country has such choice on OTT platforms, whether they be SVOD or AVOD or something in between, than the US. So the US will grow the fastest. The US will add $10 billion in its already mature market by 2029. And by platform, the big 6 US platforms, Netflix, Disney Plus, HBO Max, Paramount Plus, Amazon and Apple TV Plus, will take about 40% of total subscribers by 2029. We expect most of the big players to launch hybrid AVOD, SVOD tiers, and as you can see on the right-hand side, advertising will add to their revenues, but of course will be quite a small proportion as compared to the SVOD revenues that they will take. So although some of those big companies will launch hybrid AVOD, SVOD platforms, they won't launch them to as many countries as they initially said they were going to launch them to, and they won't launch them as quickly as they said they were going to. So there's some caution creeping into the marketplace here. But it's not just about the US players. Here is a chart that shows you some of the biggest players around the world that aren't based in the US. And as you can see, the top 4 platforms mentioned here are in China. You can also see from this chart, the orange block represents AVOD revenues. So AVOD revenues are quite important to a lot of these platforms in outside the US. So the US will be the AVOD revenue winner by 2029, and it will add the highest number of revenues as well. However, our AVOD revenue forecasts are lower now than they were earlier on in the year, partly because of the global advertising slowdown, but also because, as I mentioned before, the delays in launching the AVOD, SVOD tiers for some of the major SVOD platforms around the world. And in fact, they won't launch in as many countries as we thought they would do. Okay, so looking at AVOD revenues by platform, it's much more fragmented market than the SVOD sector. And I think on the pie chart, when you look at the others $40 billion, that tells you a lot. I mean, it tells you that local broadcasters have a lot to contribute as far as AVOD revenues are concerned. That the big 6 US companies will add revenues, but they won't be as tremendous amount. There'll be useful additions to their revenues, but there won't be a tremendous amount. So a lot of the companies included in that others figure will be local broadcasters expanding their AVOD packages. We include FAST in our AVOD forecasts. FAST being, in our definition, advertising on online linear channels. So it's not dedicated channels, but channels taking linear channels taking an online presence. So FAST revenues will more than double in the next few years, and FAST share of total AVOD will increase from 1/5 this year to about 1/4 by 2029. Okay, again, the US will be dominant in the FAST scene. It will take 6.5 billion of the 17 billion total. It will be the only country with over $1 billion in revenues. So still a lot of dominance from the US there. The rank 9 to 20 means country number 9 to country number 20. So you can see that there's a concentration of power here with, and it's not just FAST, it's all the revenues are concentrated in the top 20, with somewhere over 80%, usually about 85% of total revenues concentrated just into 20 countries. And stick on the far side of things, 3 companies, Pluto, owned by Paramount, Roku, and Samsung TV Plus, will take about 2/3 of FAST revenues in 2029, with the rest being more localized than those international players. Okay, moving on to the SVOD side of things and comparing it against the traditional pay TV market. We define an SVOD subscriber as being a home that pays for at least one SVOD subscription. So as you can see, the number of subscribers to SVOD will remain quite a lot lower than the number of subscribers to pay TV. In fact, the number of pay TV subscribers will stay just below 1 billion, despite massive cord cutting in the US. The difference will be made up of more subscribers in emerging markets, especially. However, when you look at the revenue side of things, and this is what the Wall Street analysts are doing a lot now, rather than looking at subscriber numbers, they're looking at revenue figures and more importantly to them, the profitability of these services. SVOD it will be at about 3/4 of the pay TV total this year, but by 2029 it would have overtaken pay TV, with SVOD revenues up by 21 billion and pay TV revenues down by 21 billion. How can the pay TV revenues be falling when the number of pay TV subscribers is increasing slightly? Well, people will be paying less for pay TV because more and more of the subscribers will be outside the US. Okay, so the US will be the dominant force in SVOD revenues. The total, just to remind you, will be 131 billion by 2029. So the US will take a good proportion of that, and the US and China together will take over half. And from the additional $21 billion, the US will be the biggest earner as far as that's concerned. Then again, looking at the platforms, the growth, Disney will be the fastest growing platform, adding $5 billion to reach $14 billion by 2029. Netflix won't add that much, but will be the biggest single platform with $35 billion in total in 2029. And that's more than Disney Plus, HBO Max and Paramount Plus together. So Netflix will continue to dominate as far as this is concerned. However, it's not always the winner. And here are some examples of countries where Netflix is not the top ranking platform by the number of subscribers. In fact, Netflix will never be allowed into the Chinese market as a standalone platform and is unlikely to return to Russia by 2029, even if a ceasefire was or truce was announced quite soon. And this is just on the SVOD side of things. Of course, you have to remember there are a lot of local players who are busily involved in the AVOD side of things as well. So the number of SVOD subscribers, that's homes paying for at least one subscription, will increase by nearly 100 million in the next few years. But the number of subscriptions bought will increase by 321 million in the next few years. That will bring the average number of subscriptions bought per subscriber up to 2.34. Also, you can see from the right-hand side, penetration of SVOD in TV households will vary quite considerably from one country to the next. Not much growth in the US, but however, down to other countries like India, where it's very low at the moment, or pretty low at the moment, growing a bit, but still way beyond the others. The average penetration rate in 2029 across the globe will be 42% of households paying for at least one subscription, up from 38% this year. So it's not a tremendous growth, but there will be, as I say, 321 million more subscribers. So the number of subscriptions, the US and China are the dominant forces here. The US overtook China in 2021. China's had a bit of a slowdown in recent years as the government sort of clamped down on the content that the OTT platforms are providing. But 25 countries will have more than 10 million subscriptions. Those 25 countries will account for 90% of the world's total. So the US will also be the biggest earner in additional subscriptions by adding 30 million subscriptions over the next few years, out of the 321 million global total. India will also have good growth, and so will Brazil. So this is just to show the chart I showed before. The penetration of SVOD subscribers per TV households varies quite considerably, even in the richer countries, even by 2029. So the US will be way ahead, and the other countries will be various. This isn't a ranking, this is just examples, by the way. So 14 countries in 2029 will have over 70% penetration of TV households by at least one subscription, and that's up from only 4 countries this year. If you look at this chart, take Japan, for example, with only 59% penetration by 2029. If Japan had 70% penetration, that would mean the addition of 6 million more subscriptions in Japan. And again, a comparison here of some of the richer countries around the world. As I mentioned before, the global average is 2.34 subscriptions per SVOD subscriber in 2029. So you'll notice that Germany, Italy, and Spain, Korea, and Japan are all below the global average. The US is way out in front. But if Germany had an average of 3, that would mean the addition of 19 million more subscriptions there. Okay. So Netflix will remain the SVOD winner by subscriptions as well as by revenues, by having nearly 300 million subscribers by 2029. Disney Plus will be more than 100 million behind Netflix, and those Disney Plus figures include Hotstar, which I'll talk about a bit later on. But the big 6 US companies will have nearly 1 billion subscriptions by 2029. That's up from 750 million this year. The Netflix, as you can see from the right-hand side, will grow by $44 million, which might sound quite surprising to people, considering it's supposed to be reaching maturity in a lot of ways. It had a boost this year by clamping down on password sharing. But anyway, we think Netflix will continue on its way, spending a lot of money on content and continuing to be profitable. However, some of its competitors, Disney Plus, HBO Max, and Paramount Plus, have had a lot of pressure from the Wall Street analysts on their profitability. So they will spend less on content for their SVOD services and will spend less on investing on in launching in new countries or new territories that they haven't launched on before. So that they're more cautious until they're profitable, and they're sort of moving quickly towards that. But I don't think they'll go mad and spend lots of money on new content after they become profitable. So they will be spending less on the content. They have other revenue streams as well, which also distracts from their SVOD services. Okay, I mentioned it before. Hybrid AVOD, SVOD revenues and subscribers. These 4 platforms have all launched hybrid AVOD, SVOD tiers in various countries, or have announced that they'll launch them in the next few years. We don't think they're going to launch in as many countries as they were. I think they're becoming more cautious, partly because of the advertising slowdown. So this will be restricted to the richer countries around the world. And some of those platforms are being more adventurous than others, let's put it that way. So for those 4 platforms mentioned in the charts, they will generate hybrid AVOD, SVOD revenues of about $20 billion, which will be pretty equally split between AVOD and SVOD. when it comes to the split, when it comes to a hybrid's share of total subscribers, there's quite a lot of variation between the four platforms. Netflix will have the lowest proportion because because of the legacy it's had of SVOD only subscribers who basically don't have the inclination to switch to a hybrid service, even though the hybrid service might be cheaper. However, for the other three services, they're newer and subscribers are more flexible. So we think that there will be a higher proportion of homes taking these hybrid services, Disney being the largest proportion at 39% of the four mentioned there. This chart shows how influential three platforms, Netflix, Amazon, and Disney Plus, are in the major markets around the world. These are the markets ranked in order of importance. So the US being the most important, China second, UK third, etc., based on their AVOD revenues and based on their SVOD revenues and based on their SVOD subscriptions. So in the US, those three platforms will take less than the total subscriptions by the end of this year. China and Russia, obviously, they are not available, but in the UK, those three platforms will be really dominant and only leave 16% of total subscriptions for other platforms. So when people say in the UK, it's overcrowded, you don't get the choice you get in the US by any means. So you can also see, very broadly in the Western European countries, the same sort of thing is true. There's a dominance of those three platforms in their marketplaces. Okay, as I mentioned before, there have been various reports coming out from India saying that Disney is about to or wants to sell its Hotstar operation there, either partially or completely. And one of the potential buyers mentioned has been Jio, which is owned by Reliance, which is a huge company that also owns Jio, which is a mobile network as well as a TV company. So there's also been criticism from Wall Street about Disney Plus putting so much emphasis on its subscription numbers. And one of the reasons why is because at the end of last year, Hotstar had 58 million subscribers, and that represented 36% of Disney Plus's total subscriptions worldwide. However, if you look at the right-hand side, those 58 million subscribers weren't generating that much in revenue. So that's only 6% of total revenues came from those 58 million subscribers. So you can see why Disney might be tempted to offload the service, and it's already classified as being a non-core service. Okay, there are markets that are overcrowded. Here are a couple of examples. Poland, which has an overcrowded pay TV marketplace as well, and India, which is obviously a vast market, but it also has a very strong local entertainment market, and you can see the splits by quite narrow by some of those services. You can also see that the US companies have much lower penetration there of subscriber numbers than they do in other countries around the world. Other overcrowded markets include the US, and there has been some consolidation there, whether it be with the likes of Hulu and Disney Plus merging into a single app quite soon, or Showtime devolving really. There's going to be consolidation. Other markets, the Nordic markets, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland, you could argue that they're also overcrowded, and we might see some changes there in the next few years through mergers. And the last slide shows you what you can't do. So about a quarter of the world's population, the US companies can't get into China or Russia, and only have limited access to the likes of Pakistan and Bangladesh, Venezuela as well. And those, China and Russia take about a quarter of the world's subscriptions by 2029 as well. So there are other countries that we haven't included in this chart. We don't do forecasts for North Korea or Iran, but they're sizable markets that foreign companies can't really get involved in. And there are other countries where the government is pretty heavily involved in the media markets, including, for example, Turkey and the Philippines. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening. If anyone's got any questions, I'll be more than happy to try and answer them.
Thank you, Simon. That was fascinating, as always. So I've got a couple of questions here. The first one, what would be the key reason that SVOD stays so strong in your forecast and AVOD hardly makes a dent in this? Geographic, economic, consumer behaviour?
Well, as I said before, AVOD is actually going to go faster than SVOD. So it's going to add more revenues than SVOD over the next few years. But it's a newer market. There is a global advertising slowdown as well. But the other thing to take into account is those four big platforms that I mentioned, and you can include Amazon on that as well, being very selective on where they launch these hybrid AVOD, SVOD tiers. So they're not going to go gung-ho, all out global launches of those tiers, because you can't sell advertising to every single market around the world. You have to be very selective. It's a much more localized process selling advertising than it is selling subscriptions in some ways.
Okay, thank you. And then there is another one here. How is the UK impacted?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the UK is a lot of people in the UK think it's overcrowded. If you compare the choice you get in the UK to the choice you get in the States, we're definitely not overcrowded here. There's quite a lot of room for growth. Whether there'll be all that growth is another thing. HBO has a long-term contract with Sky that doesn't expire until the end of 2025. I would doubt that they're going to launch as a standalone service after that contract expires, because one, it's lucrative, and two, the market would have matured somewhat by then. So yeah, the UK market is an interesting one. It's got quite a vibrant advertising sector as well, compared with some of its European neighbours. But yeah, there's still plenty of growth to be had in the UK, I think.
Excellent. And then one last one for now, unless anybody else wants to jump in. Will all major platforms be moving to hybrid AVOD, SVOD, or will any notable platforms remain only AVOD or SVOD?
Right, good point. Well, I would imagine that Pluto on the AVOD side of things is unlikely to move into the SVOD side of things, because it's owned by Paramount, and Paramount Plus has operations around the world. As I said, a lot of the platforms have been very selective about which countries they're launching in. Netflix has only launched in a dozen countries, and it's sort of hinted in its last but one financial results that perhaps it was a bit harder than they thought it was going to be in the first place. So yeah, there are little things to take into account. But yeah, I think the hybrid networks will concentrate on the rich countries around the world.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Let me see. No, that's everything. If anybody has any more questions, you can email info@ctameurope.com or email Simon directly there. And if you are a member of CTAM Europe, you can view this again. If you want to see all the nitty-gritty figures, you can view this again on the members only section of ctameurope.com. So thank you, Simon. It's really good to see you again as well. And thanks everybody for joining. See you soon. Thank you. Bye. Bye.